In 1609, 1610, there's the time called the starving time, when the colony was losing scores of people every day. They went back into a starving mode, and they decided to leave the colony, to leave Jamestown and sail down the river. They got down about 10 miles, and in came the savior of the day, and this is another unsung hero, and his name is Sir Thomas West, Lord Delaware. He was that level of sophistication. He brought in hundreds of men, healthy men, provisions for a year. Jamestown was going to make it from then on. It's not a story of happily ever after. Now, there is Pocahontas, and this is not about this Pocahontas, but it's about this Pocahontas, the real Pocahontas. And she was instrumental in keeping Jamestown successful after the starving time because of the fact that she converted to the Church of England, and she also married not John Smith, but a man named John Rolfe, who experimented with what they found would make money for the colony, and that's growing tobacco. And there was a huge market in Europe already. So people could make money overnight as they spread from the town. And Virginia is not going to be an area of towns. It's going to be an area of plantations all up and down these rivers. So tobacco makes it for the company for a while. They didn't find gold and silver, and that was the plan, as they saw the Spanish do. But they were supposed to convert the Indians to Protestantism. Well, the other big event in Jamestown that, why should you care in Ohio about Jamestown? Well, I think this, in 1619, in this area where there is the only remaining part of Jamestown above ground, this church tower, is a building that's built over a space that we all have to deal with every day today. And that is, this is where the first representative assembly met in the country. And it's met every year since in Virginia, and it serves as the basis of American government. So here you have the Representative Assembly, and I thought it was curious. I've read some of the accounts of that first meeting, and they talked about taxes, they talked about trade, and they talked about security. And what's changed? So Jamestown became a port after that, but not a really busy port, because the channel wasn't near land at that point. But they went on, and it went on to be the capital of Virginia for about 100 years. And the government got big fast. In 1665, a state house complex was built and that had a tendency to burn, and it burned twice. And finally, the complex was taken down, and the government function moved to nearby Williamsburg, Virginia. That became the capital in the 18th century. But this was the largest building ever built in colonial America, ever. Boston, anywhere. And it didn't survive. It's just foundations out there now. And it's a pity, because it would be a real icon for the country. Now, I'm going to fast forward through the 19th century really quickly and say Jamestown became a farm. It also was embroiled in the Civil War. And around this, the one remaining church tower was a Civil War earthwork. So a lot of land was disturbed of the town. It was basically abandoned, not totally abandoned right after the government moves, but it became a tobacco plantation. So there was a little ground disturbance, but nothing major as other early colonies. For example, this is New York in 1637. And I say good luck doing archaeology in New York. It can be done, but there's a lot of impact from the modern city growing up. Didn't happen at Jamestown. Jamestown became a time capsule. And then along came this lady, and she wanted to save this brick tower in the late 19th century. It's about the time Chautauqua movement's going on, beginning, and people are beginning to look at the nation may have a history that we want to say. And so her name is Mary Jeffrey Galt, and in 1889 she formed a group called the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities. Now, I didn't know her, but this is a development officer, writ big. I mean, I'm sure no one could say no to this woman. Take a look. And she also, with her own hands, was able to find the remains of churches that went with this tower, that had been abandoned through the years, had fallen down, and the APVA, as they were known, were able to rebuild the church in 1907. So Jamestown was going to be saved, that site, but no one really knew that what also was going to be saved was the fort. Most everyone believed that the fort was located where I show it there, out in the water. The first time I went to Jamestown, there was a national park ranger there, and the actual Jamestown site that I'm talking about is privately owned in the national park. And I said, well, I want to walk around with Pocahontas, and John Smith walked, and where's the fort? And he pointed out the river. He said, you're too late, it's gone. But there was some dirt behind him exposed, and I could see, I wasn't an archaeologist at the time, but I could see different colors of dirt, and one was labeled Civil War, and there was a clay layer. And then under that was a dark layer, and it said colonial, and you could see artifacts again. And then under that were stone tools from prehistory. So I thought to myself, what is this dark layer? I asked him. He kind of looked at me like, well, I really don't know. And I got the idea in my head that maybe somebody someday, some archaeologist might look at that dark layer. And here he comes.
Am I excited? You better believe it.
This is day one. And I borrowed a wheelbarrow and a shovel and began digging.
Taking the first shovelfuls of dirt on the Jamestown Rediscovery Project.
Obviously, this is before color film was invented. It's a long time ago, but not really. I just Photoshop again. Well, the church, to me, I had a theory that the church itself was located in the center of the remains of the fort, if the fort had been in this place. And that made sense because the record said the church was in the midst of the fort. Oh, okay. And so I started digging, I wrote myself in. I'll have to tell you the story. And the first shovelful, I found a piece of pottery. I don't know if you can see it up there. It was kind of pottery that goes to a vessel that you see on the right. And I thought, wow, I knew it was old enough. You can date pottery. I'd become an archaeologist for 30 years before that. And a woman and her son were at the rope, and they'd been watching me a long time. And she finally said, what are you doing? Like, does anyone know you're here digging in this park? And I went up to her with this piece of pottery, and I said, I'm finding James Fort. Look, we're going to find it. And she started backing away with her son. And said, come on, Bobby, let's not upset the nice man. Let's get out of here. And I was so excited. And I've been that way ever since about this project, because that was artifact one of what is now 2 million artifacts. And they tell the new Jamestown story. Now, the big artifacts are really just dirt. And here is a streak in the clay, which you can see is just a dark streak. But this is where a trench was dug, and in it were put in upright logs to form a wall of a fort. And here's what we find. We just find these little sockets of rotted out wood in a straight line. So that looked pretty good, and that happened the first summer. See, this could be this fort. Then where I started digging turned out to be a cellar that had been under a building that had been filled in 1610. And armor started coming up. And coins and things that were definitely old enough to be James Fort. It was military enough, and more pottery that could be dated, that are late 16th, early 17th century. Boy, this looked good. But we couldn't really say anything until the dots were all connected. So in about 8 years later, we had found the south wall on the river. We found this west wall, another line of those trench with the little palisades in it, that they're called upright logs. Add to that, we found finally in 2007, all the dots and dashes came together, and as a triangle. We've since marked where we found the palisades with these upright logs, and they weren't there from the 17th century. But so once we got our arms around James Fort, and it looked pretty much like that little sketch map I showed you, which was from 1608, we began to find building sites. And there again, just different colors of dirt, where someone dug and put a post in the ground and a series that line up and make a rectangle, support a roof, which were there to support a roof. This is the kind of buildings that were first built. They're called mud and stud, and it's all organic. You found it. Posts in the ground, mud walls, and a thatched roof. Then, finally, once we knew where the middest of the fort was, which took us another 7 years, found another series of post holes, but huge post holes, that matched what I thought was probably the church that was built in 1608. Then other parts to the compound. We're filling in the scenery here. This is the backdrop for what we already know from documents, but you can begin to empathize and begin to see how this played out. We found a kitchen that was just a cellar, steps down into it, 2 ovens. We found a replacement kitchen, a larger one, and all these below ground, where they began living in these dugouts. This with posts in the ground that would support a building. So here's a couple of other ovens that you see on the left-hand side, the little round igloo things. And wow, you know, we're filling in what a map. We made a map of the architect's map, if you will, of the first town plan, the English town plan, and then found where there were larger buildings built on stone foundations by 1610. They began to realize these cellars would leak. So the main challenge has been, however, there was this Civil War fort sitting on the early 17th century fort on a fort, as it turned out. So in some cases we'd have to go down 8 or 10 feet to get to the level of the 17th century. But we excavated that fort diligently and actually preserved every part of it. It was a gun emplacement that never saw any action, but that didn't quite disappear this easily. But that's what was down there, and so the whole site now is a different thing. A different topography, if you go. Well, I mentioned the church, and here then is the map of Jamestown that took 21 years to reveal a major nucleus of the first permanent English town. In the course of these excavations, we also found water wells. Now, they turn out to be real treasure chests for us historical archaeologists, because anything that stays wet permanently down about 10 feet below the ground is preserved, like wood, leather, other things. And so the well, we found the first one, which actually was the second well. And these moments of discovery are incredible. Here's one.
You want to go there?
Some days are better than others, and this one, totally preserved. It's a halberd. It's bent, but it's a halberd. It's a ceremonial battle axe. And when Delaware came to town, it was said that 50 halberdiers would march in front of it as a ceremony. So there you see some halberdiers. So neat artifact, kind of nice. Wooden handle survived. And then we found a pistol that was double loaded. Still had 2 pistol balls in the barrel. It shows in this X-ray.